I knew I was just looking for one little button that says go live. So there it is. Let's see if we are on YouTube now. It might take a moment. All right. I think we're live. I think. Not 100%. Just look at something here. Let's see what we look like. Just want to make sure I'm not like, I don't think I'm sharing my screen or anything. Make sure I don't look weird. Live. Live viewer. Damn. Yeah, they really puts you. We lost Nick. Did I do that? Huh.
Okay, I reconnected and I set it up to connect to my headphones. Does it sound any different? Because I can hear myself in here now.
I would say talk a little bit more.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
I would say it actually sounds worse.
Really? Shit.
Yeah.
All right. I'll let me exit out again and come back in with the internal mic, and we'll forget the headphones.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. All right.
All right. Back in. All right. That was worth a shot, but it didn't work very well.
It was, but I think you don't sound too bad now, and maybe it was with 3 people, and I mean also the audio.
I think my computer was just far from me. Like it was 3 times, maybe twice or 3 times as far from me as it is now. So I'll try to speak up too and not mumble, and maybe that'll help.
True. 1 second before we get into our discussion here. I want to see the chat. But I also want to kind of have this full screen. Can you see anything? Can you see like a StreamYard chat?
I see a private chat.
Let's see. One second. Let me see. Okay, so it works. It shows up on the right there too. Okay, good. All right. Let's get into it. This is our post episode, episode 1 reaction to The Last of Us. Very just brief context here. I've played the game twice now. I just replayed it right before the show. Nick here has not played the game. He really knows, I would say, nothing. We've talked about it. He's watched the trailers. He's had some predictions and everything. And I want to pass it on to you first. You know, give me just your raw. You just finished this 5 minutes ago. Raw reaction.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to block out any thinking about the game or any connections to the game. I mean, I'm sure there are changes that were made, and that's stuff that you can talk about. But just as a show, just as a first episode of a show, I mean, I would say this is one of the better first episodes of a show I've ever seen. Like, I was really tense going into it, just because I know what the the basic plot is. I know that we're dealing with a post-apocalyptic world. I know that we're dealing with, characters trying to navigate this world. And so when you open the show like they did, which was, I thought, quite effective, with it was fun to see John Hannah, who's an actor I like whenever I see him and stuff, playing that scientist character talking about the way that he felt fungus could one day play a role in the spreading of a disease and in causing like apocalyptic events. And that sets the tone. And from there, you know what's coming. And this is what's so effective about it. You know what the show is about. You know what he's laying out for you. And so you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so throughout that whole sequence with the daughter in the opening, I don't know how many minutes, little droplets of information of spooky stuff are thrown at you. And with every instance of that happening, I became more and more tense. I found myself like going like this, scrunching my shoulders together in my chair, watching the show.
Yeah, I was like this. I was like this.
We don't need to break down the whole, first part of the episode necessarily yet. I know you just want my initial thoughts. So, I mean, I found the first section the most compelling. Like if anything, I wanted to spend more time in that, like opening, breakdown of the world and all of that. But what we got was amazing. And what followed was still really good and left me wanting more. When that episode ended, I was like angry. I was like, damn it, man. Like, I want to know what's going to happen next. So it's I'll have to think on it, maybe watch it again in order to really tell you, like, where does this rank in terms of like the best first episodes of a show ever. But it's up near the top, certainly. Like, that was really good. So from your end of things, from somebody that's played the game and knows the plot, knows the characters, what did you think?
So yeah, because there's certainly a lot to unpack, and I can go through some of the things that you mentioned, but I was, I was just very excited for this show. You're talking, maybe the best story in a video game ever. Many people say that. So when you're transferring that over to film, I mean, a lot of people didn't want this because people have always said, big hardcore fans have said, just play the games. Why even do this? And what this show is doing for me is it is delivering on those moments, those key moments that were in the game and were amazing, but it's also expanding. There are good amount of scenes that are scene for scene, shot for shot, and dialogue for dialogue in the game, but there's also a pretty good amount in this episode that is expanded. So, like, I guess before I get into it, I was extremely happy with this. I went into this so hyped. I kept hearing that this was a masterpiece, and within those first like 5 minutes, I said to myself, I was like, this feels like a masterpiece. This feels perfect. And I agree. The first 30 minutes, because I was actually checking run times just to see like, how long did this last? How long was this? This is spoilers. The parts with Sarah, it was about 35 minutes were the sections with Sarah. And, me and my buddies who have played this game before, we all had different opinions of where we thought that was going to happen. Some people thought that happened in the first 5 minutes, like it does in the game. This happens very early in the game. Some people thought they'd stretch it and it'd be the cliffhanger that would be the end of the first episode and we wouldn't see Ellie, which for me, I was shocked to see Ellie in this episode. I did not think that Ellie would be in this episode. And I think it was a great idea to have her in it because at the end of the day, it's a TV show. You've got, two co-leads, Joel, Ellie, even casual fans, I think know those two names. So I think it was smart to introduce her in this, even if she doesn't pop up in the games until a little bit, until about an hour or two. But it was amazing. It was exactly what I wanted. That, like you said, the tension in the beginning of the episode was unreal. I mean, it was unreal.
So let's talk a little more about that because there's, I think, a lot to say about that. You said 35 minutes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, seeing so much of it from the daughter, Sarah, was that her name? her
Yes.
perspective was really effective because there's something extra disturbing about events like that playing out and seeing it from a kid's perspective because it just you're helpless enough already as an individual going through something like that. But to go through it as a kid who's just sort of incapable of truly understanding, incapable of understanding the ramifications of even doing anything about it, of defending yourself to the extent that you need to, is sort of extra scary. And so there were all these really effective moments that really stood out to me, like little things like when she was in that clockmaker, clock fixer guy's shop, and the wife comes in, and the guy and the wife are speaking Arabic to each other. She doesn't understand. She doesn't know what's going on, but it's clear that something is wrong, and we as an audience are understanding that something is wrong. But her having her in an environment where people are communicating about that in a language she doesn't understand makes us as the audience in the same situation. And it was really effective. And then you had things like the fighter jets going overhead, even little things like when she was in class,
Someone's coughing, right?
there's a kid coughing in class.
Yeah.
You picked out on that too. I was like, oh no, like is the other shoe gonna drop here? There's all
It
these
was so
little
subtle. It was very, very subtle. I like that. The coughing.
yeah, they just kept dropping these little breadcrumbs. It was really good, really effective.
Yeah. In the shop, I think so. There, even in the games, like a big mystery is like where where did this happen and everything, and that is something that I haven't played the second game, but I probably am gonna play part 2 sometime during the course of this show. I don't know if they get more into that, but that is something that is not really super confirmed in the first game. So I imagine that's not really what the story's about. It's 20 years later. It's not about where it started. That's not really what it's about. But it always was pretty much confirmed that it was something overseas. So it could be, this was the year 2003. And they played up that really well where, hey, we don't have smartphones. Like her even coming home and like, hey, did you check out the news? Is everything okay? Talking to her neighbor. That's exactly how you found out things. Like you're on the bus, your kid coming home from school. She doesn't have a phone. She has no idea what's going on. So I'm really glad that they did that. And I don't think in the game it was 2003. I think it was a little bit past that. So the show has an opportunity to get into more of that kind of stuff. So
that's an effective change because this sounds crazy, but it's getting to the point where like the year 2003, if something's set in 2003, it kind of functions like a period piece because you are sort of out of time. You are in this other era where, like you said, the way that you access information was so wildly different from now. So when you see it playing out on screen, like it does feel like just this total other time and place that you almost can't even relate to anymore. You might remember it, but it feels so separated from you. And so, yeah, like her not having a smartphone or the internet really, adds to the tension. And then even little things like she's at the neighbor's house and the neighbor, she asks her about, hey, is everything like okay? Like, is something going on in the world? And she's like, people just need Jesus. Like, come, let's bake cookies. And then meanwhile, she's standing looking at this DVD or whatever, and the grandma's like going crazy in the background, making this big mouth face, and you're like, whoa, what's going on there? And so, yeah, I can't compliment the show enough for that first 35 minutes. It was so effective. It was basically perfect.
Mm-hmm. It was like A Quiet Place Part 2 in the opening.
Yeah.
I know there's other things that are similar, but I'm so glad that it was this long. Like I that's something I wanted. I wanted it to be the whole episode initially before this show aired. And I think that we will go back. I think the director has said like we're gonna have flashbacks to it. The game doesn't have that. The game starts, and I figured I'll kind of go through some of the things that are different in the game.
Yeah, please do.
So the game begins with Sarah waking up at that 2:14 a.m. That is how the game starts. You play as Sarah, you wake up, you're like woken up by loud noises, and it's effective in its own right. But like, you have no idea what's going on. You just get up and you're like, Joel, Dad, you up or something? And it was implied that they had stayed up the night before watching something. She looks down the steps and sees the TV lights on. She goes down and she sees police cars go by in the window, and you're just, it's a little bit similar where like, something is going on, very, very serious. And then that scene proceeds with Joel in the game busting through the door saying, we got to go. We got to go. She does not, the Adlers are mentioned. In fact, I think one of them like runs over to the house or something, or no, Joel runs into the house. I think he says like, the Adlers are not well. They're sick. We got to go. She never goes over to the neighbor's house. So the game really, the first few minutes, you're hopping in the car with Joel and Tommy, and that sequence, I'm curious about your opinion on this sequence, was just like the game. And I think, I don't know how I feel about the way they shot that in the car, because again, they were doing that to honor the game, because you're playing as Sarah in the back seat and you have control of the camera. So Joel is driving, or Tommy's driving, Joel's in the front seat, and you are just, you're driving, it's dark, Sarah's asking questions. You as the gamer have the controller, you're controlling the camera, you're looking around just like it does in the show. You drive by the farmhouse that's burning, same thing, up to the sign. Oh, we got it. The highway's closed. That was all the same, like exactly the same. And I kind of felt, for me, like probably the weakest part of the episode for me, because it was just exactly as it was in the game. But the tension was still all there. Like, didn't take me out of it or anything. And seeing the planes, that was not in the game. That was such a jaw-dropping moment. Just seeing these planes, and you're kind of like, I was thinking at first, like, are they all, which I think they're probably just leaving, just like getting the hell, just going somewhere, or something more crashing. Just crazy.
Well, I mean, for me, obviously, no preconceived notions, no connection to the game. Those thoughts weren't in my head. I mean, I thought that sequence was really well done. I thought, the decision to do, I guess it wasn't just one shot, but it was kind of a couple in a row, maybe. It made you feel sort of like Sarah felt in the back seat, just helpless, and you're just like watching this play out. I will say, so in regard to what you mentioned about the game being different, beginning with waking up at 2 a.m. I mean, my thought is, well, what a great addition to include some of what came before, because I think spending that time with Sarah and Joel together was really crucial, not only to kind of add some character development for Joel, but to really sell, spoilers again, Sarah's death, because that made me tear up. Like that got me emotional. I was upset. I didn't recall, Sarah being a feature of the games, and she wasn't in much of the trailer, so I knew that she wasn't gonna.
Did you see it coming? Like, I mean, was it?
I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I knew that she wasn't gonna last much longer. But I mean, once they got into the town, and they're surrounded by people going crazy in the streets, like I was again gripped. And it really reminded me of, and you haven't seen this movie, I know you said you want to see it, Children of Men. There are a couple sequences in Children of Men, which is also very post-apocalyptic. That was a lot like that. And that was directed by Alfonso Cuarón, one of our great filmmakers. Yeah. And so I actually don't even know who directed this episode, but I mean, hats off, because it was picture perfect. Again, I've said it already, but yeah, I thought that whole sequence was really great.
So I think this episode was directed, I can look it up, but I believe it was directed by the Chernobyl guy. I don't think Neil, I don't think Neil did it, which Neil is the creator of the game, The Last of Us. Yeah. And I do think, Neil does direct some of this show, and he's not a film director, so this is a first for him. And I mean, I imagine it went very well, because I've heard very good reception. So this first episode was directed by Craig Mazin, which that's the Chernobyl guy, right?
Okay.
Yeah, Chernobyl. He's the Chernobyl guy. Created the 5-part miniseries. Craig Mazin.
Makes sense, considering Chernobyl is one of the probably better made series ever. In
Yeah.
HBO. Can we talk about HBO for a minute? Like, here's a thought I have. So if let me pose this question to you. If it was announced that they were making a Last of Us show and it was going to be on Amazon, or if it was going to be on Netflix, would you have been as excited for it compared to going in knowing that it was going to be an HBO product?
No.
Yeah, I feel the same, because number one, there's this whole history with video game adaptations, and we can get into that. Number two, the zombie, and I don't know if you want to call these guys zombies, but I mean, functionally, they're zombie-ish. The whole zombie genre, if you want to call it a genre, it is kind of played out at this point. It's been done a lot in recent years and historically. And so those two factors combined already kind of pit you against the shit.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, because it was HBO going in, I said, you know what, I'm all in, because I implicitly trust HBO. I'm not going to say every single show they've ever made is amazing, but the production quality, the talent that they're able to get, the relationships that they have, it sets everything up for success. You're building a hill rather than building a hole to dig out of, right? And so I just love that HBO exists. I hate to be a shill for a corporation, but they just produce quality content over and over and over again. And I'm so glad that they are the ones who are ultimately producing the show. Do we want to acknowledge? We have a question in the chat from Derpy 501st. Is that someone we know, or is that just
it could be someone we know, maybe not, but a question: does anyone want to watch the Halo series? So, I mean, that kind of goes in line with your question. I like Halo. I should be watching that series, and I've not watched that series because I haven't heard good things about it. If they put that on HBO, I probably would have been really excited. I would have been very excited, but
that's not something I'm all that interested in. He said it's just a joke, but we'll move on. So, let's see. Do you want to talk about? Let's talk about Pedro Pascal. I mean, you played the game, so what did you think of him as Joel so far?
Immediately, he felt like Joel, and I think part of it was don't ask me why, but I did not think that he would be doing his little Southern accent. I don't know. And it makes sense. This takes place starts out in Texas. He's a Texan. And Joel, Pedro Pascal, I find it hard to believe that he hasn't played the game, because he has said that he didn't want to play the game because he wanted to create his own Joel. People freaked out. I wasn't worried. Neil Druckmann is part of if Neil's okay with it, then it's probably fine, which I should mention that Neil co-wrote the first episode with Craig Mazin, who directed this one. And the next episode, Neil Druckmann is directing. So that'll be his first episode he's directing. But anyway, he was perfect. He felt like Joel. That's the highest praise I can say. He felt like Joel. I already have a Joel in my head, in my mind. To me, there is a Joel already, that voice. And this just felt like Joel. He perfectly embodied who Joel is. And Joel is, he's very, a little bit black and white. You'll very much see that as the series goes on. I'm pretty sure you certainly got that feel a little bit now. He is a survivor. I mean, you even got that moment of that when he's driving on the road and there's that family asking for help. I mean, you could look at that as fucked up. I mean, they had room in the car. That family had a kid, but at the end of the day, Joel has survived for 20 years because of the decisions that he makes. They're not easy decisions. He doesn't like to make these decisions. You can see that he's not, saying, "Oh, fuck those people." I mean, he knows what he needs to do to protect himself and his family. Of course, he couldn't do that with Sarah, and that scene as well. Dialogue for same thing, almost exactly the same thing. Joel overhears the SWAT guy, and it shows really it was a miscommunication, because I guess they didn't really know what was going on either, but they asked if anyone's hurt, and you can hear him say her ankle. So
Yeah.
maybe they may have had an indication at some point, like if people are hurt somewhere, I don't know, that they go crazy, like get bit. Oh, they're hurt. She might have been bit. Just shoot her. So
Yeah, that's brutal. But yeah, I mean, again, I don't have anything from the game in my head already, but I mean, just purely based on the show and the performance, I mean, I thought he was really effective, Pedro Pascal. I obviously like him already. He's been great in so many of the things I've seen him in. So he's coming at this show with a lot of free credit given by me. And yeah, I definitely noticed the little Southern twang. It was subtle, and I just thought he came across as like, this is another thing that was kind of interesting about the opening, sequence, the original breakout of the virus or the fungus, whatever. He's just like a working man. Like he's just a guy who's putting in the hours, trying to take care of his daughter, and I guess his brother. That's his brother, right? Who lives with him.
yeah.
Uncle Tommy. And so, he comes home from work and he just wants to relax. And it just kind of adds to like, when it comes to like an apocalyptic event like this, like, the working man, the working woman, their families, like they're not going to be keyed in to the goings on of the world. Especially, in 2003 without access to the internet. But again, he's just a working man. He's coming home. He loves his daughter. He's taking care of her. He's putting in the hours. He doesn't even care about himself, doesn't care about his own birthday. He comes across in a certain way. And I think that certain way is just as a good family man and a good dad. And one of the moments that I liked, because I'm such a big advocate of show me, don't tell me, is when the truck backs out of the driveway and we see the Gulf War sticker. Did you catch
Yeah.
that?
Yes.
And I'm assuming that's consistent with his
Tommy's,
background.
or Joel's, yeah.
So is Joel's the veteran?
Yes.
Not Tommy, or maybe both of them. I don't know.
Maybe both of them. Could be both.
Tommy seemed pretty capable with the rifle. So, yeah, I thought Pedro Pascal was really good. And I look forward to what's to come there. But I have a question for you. So obviously we're still in this opening 30, 35 minutes. I can't help it. It's the best part of the episode. So the old woman who seemed to have like Alzheimer's or what have you, when Sarah, the daughter, enters their home and she's like feeding on, well, maybe not feeding on, I don't know what she's doing because I'm not clear on what the mechanics of the way this virus spreads is.
Mm-hmm.
But she had like, I don't even know what to call them, like not tentacles, but like little like spores,
little hairs, right? Kind of like little
whiskers. I don't know what to call them, coming out of her mouth, and she was like sort of feasting on or biting on her family members with those. So like how does the virus spread from person to person? It seems to be a bite, but then how do those like spores or those strings or whiskers that come out of their mouth factor in? Like what's going on there?
So it is spread through a bite. You have to be bitten, or I think it's only just a bite. I don't really want to spoil something. There is something else. I don't think you can turn from it though.
Yeah, if you can't explain it without spoiling it, then
yeah, it's just a bite, and then when you're bitten, that's kind of when that virus, whatever that is, kind of gets into your system. And I believe they always say it starts at the head, and it kind of harkens back to what that scientist said, which I loved that scene. That was an original scene that was not in the game. And I think we had talked about, I told you this before, I don't know if you remember this, but the creator of the game, Neil, he researched just diseases in animals, because when he was deciding what disease he wanted to do, he wanted to find something that was real. And he found this virus that occurs in ants. Like that was a real, I wouldn't be surprised if, I'm not saying like that's a real, like that's from like an interview you can watch from the 60s, like on YouTube, an old video. But like it's a real thing that happens to ants. So it was kind of neat that they kind of put that in there. And yeah, basically it just spreads like fungi and just weird like that little those strips coming out of the woman's mouth were kind of just like a growth is kind of how
Yeah.
you can view it. And you will see more things like that. And it's
We did
very
see the guy that was like latched to the wall, where it was like the fungus was like totally, it had overgrown and come out of him and all, from all angles and orifices. And yeah, that was kind of creepy. What did you think of? Because I have thoughts on this. What did you think of the Sarah death scene? How did it compare to the game? What did you think of it as a scene?
Oh, I thought the Sarah death scene was done very well.
Yeah.
It's so well that I have a tough time saying which one hit more.
Mm,
I mean, I want to say the game because that happened first. Like I saw that first.
makes sense.
I don't know, like, but this they did do this very, very well. There's also this thing that happens with me a lot of times when I already know what's coming, if I've already like read a book or watched something where the scenes I know of in my like as I'm watching it, it feels like it's going really fast. And I know I've since gotten feedback from that from people who haven't like watched something, which I guess I can ask you. Like there were certain things in this that felt like they were going through them a little bit fast, like when they first kind of go 20 years in the future, it's kind of going through things, but I'm kind of also recognizing like, well, maybe it's because I'm expect I know some of these things are drawn out a little bit longer in the game and they're not here. Not really a bad thing because I think the things they went through a bit quickly, like the Robert thing. So that's a kind of a long, the weakest part of the game is hunting down Robert because it's just there's not much purpose to it. It's meant to just be there as set up for then getting to Marlene and Ellie.
Mm.
So it's kind of a longer sequence that's not great. And I kind of like maybe they were self-aware because when they arrive, the guys are all dead. So it's like, oh, I was kind of relieved. Like, okay, we don't need to have a big action shootout here. It's not necessary. We don't need to see that.
Yeah, and they walked into the hallway and it had already happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the gifts of adaptation. You can build on something, you can improve something. Maybe that's sacrilege to say for some people who really love this game, but I've not played it. So I mean, to me, it strikes me as more efficient storytelling. So I don't have an issue with that. So what I was going to say about Sarah's death is just that, honestly, to me, it was one of the better death scenes I've seen in anything. Not necessarily just because of the context of it, and that all worked for me. Like I said, it made me emotional and sad, but the actual like sometimes in movies, death scenes suck. Like the way the person dies, they like and they shut their
You're
eyes.
just waiting for it to end.
Yeah, but that was not the case here. So I give so much credit to the actress, to the director, to everyone involved because it reminded me of that death scene from I think the first Terminator, maybe Terminator 2, where the guy dies and he's like, and then he stops. And to me, that always felt like a way more realistic way to go out because you're like in shock, you're probably in pain. Your breaths become shallower and shallower, and that's what happens with the Sarah character. Partly because it's a bullet to the gut, which is usually just about a death sentence. But just the way that the actress portrayed her passing was like ultra effective, in part because it felt so real.
Yeah.
And the way that just everyone involved in that scene, the way that Pedro Pascal was like just holding on to any hope that she was going to make it out of this, asking Tommy for help. And Tommy's like, Joel, like,
yeah, that's great.
There was nothing we can do. And, he couldn't help but reject that. And who could blame him as a father? And yeah, that was quite something. But to take it back to the, jumping into the future, which you were going to me, yeah, a 20-year jump felt jarring. Like I knew there was going to be a time jump, because it became clear that, okay, the episode is probably not going to spend all of its time in the initial breakout of the virus. But 20 years was a lot. I was like, oh, wow, we're going.
It's a long time. It's a long time.
And so Joel is, because in the earlier scenes of the show, at some point Joel says he's 35, so now he's
Right.
in his mid 50s, which Pedro Pascal might be
He's
close
40.
to.
I had to look it up because when he said 30, I knew why they were doing that because I'm knowing there's a time jump. But
Yeah.
it's like he ain't 30. You're not even close. He's 47.
Is he? Okay. Well,
He's
he kind of
47.
passed for 35 and he can kind of pass for 55. And I guess that makes sense because he's in his
Yeah.
late 40s. But yeah, it was a little bit jarring. And it was just kind of like, okay, now I'm coming off of this like thrill ride basically where, okay, now I'm finally exhaling
Breathe.
and I'm like trying to get a sense of this world that he's living in. And it's, well, let's talk about the scene with the kid with the shoes that they keep showing his shoes and he comes into the compound.
Yes.
Was that something lifted from the game or was that original?
That was original. So I think that was so this is a really like this is a section that I think is probably better in the game because you are basic, you're Joel and you're kind of free to explore the quarantine zone. And that's kind of when, just like in the show, things slow down, you can breathe, and as you're walking, what's so great about this game, a little bit like Red Dead, characters are talking around you.
Yeah.
You're listening to the dialogue, like you're exploring super organically. If you're walking up to you might see a big quarantine sign with hours and like rules, and you're like, ooh, I want to read this. I want to learn about this world. And as you go up to it, there might be two guys like chatting, and you're listening to what they're talking about. It's just super lived in, feels very organic. And I think that you can't quite do that, of course, because there's a pace, right, with a show. And they did throw in like some of those exact signs, and I was like, I should have paused it because I just like reading it about like the rules and this and that, and which maybe people did that. But yeah, that was with the kid though. That kid does not show up again. And I think very much implied that he was bitten. They were giving him something to, basically, put him at peace.
You do see him again because Joel picks him up and throws him in the fire because they show his shoes again.
Oh, I didn't realize that's the. Oh, wow! Did not realize
in the back of the truck, and the older lady like won't do it probably because she feels bad throwing a kid in the fire. But Joel's just like, it's like you touched on before. Like Joel's a survivor; he does what has to be done, and so he's just like, okay, like I gotta talk. Yeah, so it's the shoes. The shoes were the key. They focused on the shoes and they introduced them, and then they focused on him again when he picked them up out of the truck.
I knew they were going to kill him. I mean, I knew that, of course. Like it was maybe like to me, it was obvious because I know what they do at the quarantine zone. So, yeah,
I mean, what you're touching on about, being able to explore the quarantine zone and hear these conversations. I mean, there's strengths and weaknesses to both storytelling mediums, video games and television or film. I mean, like you said, with a TV show, you got to keep a certain pace. You can't spend too much time, idling. But in a video game, you can explore and you can get really immersed. And so, that's probably going to be the case moving forward. There's bound to be instances where you're like, this worked better in the game because I got to check out every nook and cranny, which I totally get.
There in it, like to add on to that, this episode, not to jump ahead too much, but this episode ends with them going into the wild, right? They're going out in the wild essentially. And you don't know what's coming, of course, or anything. But along that journey, you'll stumble upon, there'll be a house and in the game, and Joel, you'll go in the house to get supplies because what's left over, food, whatever. In the game, a lot of times you will see handwritten letters written by people who left that behind. I think that's something I've been wondering. Like some of these letters are just so heavy and so well written and so interesting. Like it might be someone who writes out, April 7th, like waiting for, what is going on, dad's like, it's like, it will be written by like a young girl to say like, dad's saying the news is crazy. My Billy stopped calling me. Like, I don't, and then we have the next date, and it's just very interesting stuff. I imagine they'll just have to omit that stuff unless they have certain flashbacks of some sort.
I wouldn't be surprised if the show has us, wander into a house and they find a letter like that as a nod to the game. But I still think it works for the show because it's just like it adds to the horror of the situation. I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really look forward to the show venturing out into the unknown and into this world, and we got to see a little bit of that in the in the coming weeks on Last of Us snippet at the end, the little preview.
Oh, I didn't watch that. What did they have on there?
You nothing major. They didn't reveal anything, but you saw little clips of them in different environments. So they were in like some snow-covered like mountain town. They were in,
Oh, that's not that would be way
forest.
future.
Yeah, so I mean, I look forward to it because one of the things I really love about post-apocalyptic anything, games, movies, shows, is just the way that society falls apart and the factions that form and the way that people behave. And so, I mean, clearly this is a really smart, really well thought out story based on a really smart, really well thought out game. It's probably going to be really compelling to kind of see the creator's take on like, okay, what does this country look like when everything falls apart? We've already seen a bit of it with the quarantine zone. It's natural that something like that would be created. But I want to see the wild, man. That's what I'm pumped about.
That is the core of The Last of Us. Yeah, it's discovering and the tension and there's just so many things that in places that we will be visiting along the way. And what did you think of not only, I guess we can go through Tess as a character, Bella Ramsey, and then I do want to get to the twist at the end. I don't know if that was something that you kind of suspected. Like, it's funny when a twist, it's like to me it's like, oh, it's so obvious, but I don't know, maybe it wasn't obvious to someone who doesn't know what was so special with Ellie.
So yeah, we could touch on that. So I mean, the twist, you're referring to the fact that she was bitten and didn't have an effect on her. Yeah, I mean, so I just based on the trailers and what little I knew about the game, I knew that a big part of the plot is that Joel is trying to transport her somewhere. I don't know where. So I assumed based on that she's important and that why would she be important? Like, why would a character be important in this sort of a story? Probably because they're, even if it's a Hail Mary, like they're the shot at a cure or an antidote or a vaccine or something. So I mean, I figured like, okay, she must be one of few or maybe the only person that's known to have like survived infection. So I had assumed that. And so when Ellie, right, is the character's name?
Yes.
When she's talking to the Maxine, is that the girl that was like the Firefly?
Marlene.
When she was talking to the Firefly girl, Marlene, and she said like, "Is it going to happen to me?" That's when I was like, okay, I think I'm definitely assuming right that like she must have been bitten.
Yeah.
And she's okay. So she's the exception, or maybe the only exception to the rule. So yeah, I mean, it was certainly a twist, but it was one that I kind of anticipated, but it didn't really take away from it. It's still, it's just the thing that sets the plot forward. Like, I didn't need it to be a shocking twist.
Right. Yeah.
But I definitely want to ask you about Ellie and the portrayal by Bella Ramsey. We both watched Game of Thrones. I think her character in Game of Thrones got a little annoying.
Yeah.
But she was still good in the role.
Sure. Even when Game of Thrones got bad, she made me laugh. She made me chuckle a little bit. Like I always liked her. I mean, she wasn't really like a big important character, but
no.
Well,
what did you think
of Ramsey is
her performance?
She's legendary already. Like, she's 2 HBO like platinum shows. It's amazing. And right. Right, Pedro. Oh yeah, he was in Game of Thrones, of course, as well. Let's go. But she was great. She was great, and I had a feeling that she would be great because in my replay of the game, I then The difference in my replay was now I have these actors in my head, and I always had a hard time with thinking that of Pedro Pascal as Joel. I don't know why. I think because Joel is just so much more of like concrete. It's this character. Ellie, I was playing it and I'm like, she's gonna kill it. Like she is gonna kill it. And she did. She is great. She's a lot of fun. She has the same kind of snark and sass as she does in the game. And I would say more. She's more feisty in the game and the show right now. Like she's great. I really like her. She seems to be smart as well, capable. And I'm excited for you to, because we of course we're going to learn about a lot about her, and it's great. I was very happy with it. Very, very happy with her portrayal.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, at face value, I certainly I was into the performance also. I mean, that's honestly kind of a hard performance to pull off. Like it can be annoying. It can be annoying when you're like the teen girl who's like snarky and has an attitude. And if the actor portraying that sort of person makes it come across as like eye roll.
Right,
like it
right.
takes you out of it. But I didn't feel that way. I felt like she was pretty believable, and I enjoyed the performance. And one thing that I definitely noticed about her is that she was not only snarky and like and headstrong, she was smart. You know, a good example of that was when she went into Joel's apartment, if you want to call it that, and like pretty quickly figured out his radio sequence that he like uses to figure out like the category of a message or the tone of a message, if it's bad news, good news, whatever. Just kind of a realistic thing, because she's not like she's a little kid, but like an interesting snippet of showing that like, oh, this girl's pretty headstrong, pretty resourceful, pretty bright. We didn't tend to spend a ton of time with her as a character compared to Joel. Obviously we will as time goes on. So I look forward to that. I think it's clear that they cast the character well.
Yeah, and that scene with the radio was certainly got a big laugh for me. That was pretty good with the 80s and danger, saying that she figured it out. That was good. And yeah, I think that there was, I think back to what, probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, when they casted these two actors, there were people, myself maybe thinking about a little bit like, are they just casting these two because this guy is popular for Mandalorian and this girl's popular from Game of Thrones? Like there was that kind of fear and just kind of like, are there not to take anything away from these two, but are there not maybe two people better that are not as like obvious? And now that we have it, they're perfect. I mean, they're great. They're so perfect in these roles already. I'm so sold on it. And yeah, like you said, Ellie, she's younger. The actress is 19, which she looks younger to me. I mean, I think she is portraying a younger character. And I don't know how old Ellie is. I think maybe she'd be like 14 in the games. But she's very believably smart as well, because she's someone who was born during this. So kids who live to be Ellie's age, they are smart. They're very smart. They have to be smart. Like they have to be smart in a very different type of way, of course. They don't have the education system necessarily, but and yeah, it'll be like that's very played up in the games. I know it will here. So just, there are a lot of fun conversations that she will have with Joel about just, walking by a movie theater and say, so what's this place? And be like, oh, movie theater. People come here, watch movies. She'd be like, what? Like people just come and sit down. Like, didn't they have that at home? Like just things like that are like, it's fun. Very fun conversations.
And that's kind of another thing I tend to enjoy about like post-apocalyptic stuff. I like sort of that disconnect between those who came after and those who knew what it was like before. That's such an interesting concept to explore. I mean, what the example you just gave is perfect. It's like, you don't know what a movie theater is. Okay, like let's talk about that. Like that's That's just so strange. It's so bizarre, and I'm into it. So I have a question. So the gal who played Joel's girlfriend, I guess, she was not an
Tess.
actress I was familiar with. Tess.
Yeah.
So this is probably a tough question to answer without spoiling anything, but like, does she play a large role in the game?
Yeah, she does.
Okay. Yeah,
She
I
does.
was not familiar with her as a character. I didn't know anything about her. So when she came in and laid on the bed, I was like, "Who's this about to be?" And then, oh, she's in like the rest of the episode. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, she is. She
But she was
is.
an interesting character. She she was pretty tough, pretty resourceful, pretty hardcore. Like, you can see why her and Joel are maybe a match. You can see why she's survived this long.
She certainly feels like a survivor. She embodies that pretty well. And another character who maybe you're not thinking much about at the moment, um, Marlene.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you know this, but Marlene in game is voiced by this actress. So this is the one person. There might be someone else, but she's the only one I'm aware of who she, and the Marlene in the game looks like this Marlene. They made her look like the actress, and
Okay.
I mean, they must have said, "Hey, you can do this." And I'll say this: I was a little nervous about that because it's just, why why not get somebody different if you're going to do something different for everybody else? Can she really act? And I was very impressed. I think that she embodied Marlene, like me kind of knowing a little bit more about her because we will see her again. Um, she was great. She was great. She's a very complicated character. A lot of these characters are, but
Mhm.
she certainly is a very interesting character. And I think that I mean, she is. It makes sense that she would play it really well, and she did.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the performance was rock solid. I never would have guessed that she was like a voice actor that was stepping into the in person role.
Yeah,
So yeah, she sold me. And so the Fireflies, they were like they were like annoying almost. I don't know if you agree
yeah,
with that. Like, they just seemed like, and we'll obviously continue to unpack them as an organization and what they stand for. But it seemed very vague in the way that many insurgencies seem very vague. Like, it just kind of seemed like they were anti being told what to do. That's how it struck me. I how, like, what do you want like a military, a government to do in this situation? Of course they're going to have like strict measures to like keep this quarantine zone functioning, keep disease out, and you're just blowing shit up, and
right.
it's in the name of freedom, I guess, in the name of anti-tyranny. Like, again, without giving anything away, I mean, is there more than meets the eye with the Fireflies? Like, are they just kind of an annoying group of rebels? Like, clearly the Marlene character clearly, is doing something productive with Ellie. She sees
Yeah.
the potential to do something with her because of her presumable immunity. So I'll give them credit, or I'll give her credit at least for that. But like, is there more than meets the eye there? Or are they just kind of a bunch of ragtag rebels without a cause?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to answer that. I'll
Okay.
say that at this point in the show, like the
Mhm.
same point that we're in now that I was in playing the game, you have the same amount of information. You don't know that much about the Fireflies. You kind of feel like it's a little, maybe even a little half baked, a little underdeveloped. Is how it feels in the beginning.
Mhm.
Um, and it doesn't even really, at least when I first played it, I remember not even being super interested in it because I'm interested in Joel and Ellie in this adventure. The Firefly thing kind of feels like a backdrop, and it's a part of the story for sure. I mean, I don't want to say it's a backdrop throughout the whole thing, but is there more than meets the eye and whatnot? I will say yes. There is, and it's definitely not just the story is not about the Fireflies fighting tyranny and feeling like they're corrupt and that the government's corrupt. I forget the name of the Ferda or something. Yeah, there is more to it. There's more to it.
I mean, I'd hope you would say that, because that would probably be a little bit frustrating if there wasn't more to their story, more to their organization. Because right now they just feel a little bit like just vaguely rebellious. So I look forward to what's to come there then, I suppose.
Yeah. We have a chat here, or a message. What did you think, from Isaiah? We both loved it, and I'm someone who played the game, and this guy here has never played the game, so very different perspectives on it. And we both are pretty equal, looking at this as a pretty damn perfect premiere. Yeah, we both loved it.
Yeah, and Isaiah, I kind of let us off just by saying I'll have to think on it, but my initial reaction is that this is probably one of the better first episodes of a show I've ever seen. So that's pretty high praise, I would say. And I think the show deserves that high of praise. It's very good. I want to talk a little bit about the production design. This is something that HBO reliably does really well. And it's a big part of why their shows are as good as they are. You never feel ever in all their big flagship shows taken out of it. You never like look at a set and think, this looks like junk. I can't help but to compare it to like a striking opposite in recent television, which was the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, where we and I watched it together. Do you remember that episode where they were in like the lab where they were doing like science experiments?
Oh, yeah, that was horrible.
It looked like something put together by a high school theater class. And that's a Disney show, a Disney Star Wars show. It's crazy. But in this show, you're dealing with crazy stuff, like a downtown area that's getting hit by exploding planes and gunfire and explosions, and there's dead people in the streets. You're dealing with an environment where you're in like this quarantine zone where they've reused and retooled infrastructure like red lights or stop sign lights, you know what I'm talking about, to like, signal for people to come in and out of the quarantine zone. And there's all these other examples of that. Like, this is complex and has to be done really well, or you feel like, oh, they just shot this in a field, or, oh, they just shot this on a green screen and added some set stuff that, ties it together. You never feel like that. It looks outstanding.
Right.
And it'll probably only look better and better each time you watch it, if you rewatch it. And I can't compliment the folks involved in the production design enough, because it's so important, and they did it really, really well. And damn, like this episode is like kind of close to flawless. Like, I would give it like a 9.5 or a 10 out of 10. I'm curious if you have any criticisms, because we haven't really offered up any critiques.
I would say no real criticisms. I'd have to really think about it. I can definitely probably think of some things, and I think criticisms would be more of like things I'd maybe do differently. I don't think there's too much. I think one thing would maybe be how Joel and Tess discover that Ellie is bitten. I think it's really, I mean, it's the way it happens is I'm a fan of. But I don't know. And maybe it's, again, because I had something I knew that was coming. It just kind of felt a little bit quicker. I wished it was maybe a little more dramatic. Like she saw it. Maybe Tess is just like, you zoom in on her face and you just see her face just change to shock, and not just her screaming right away. But that's, a nitpick. That's not a real criticism.
Was that similar to the game? Did it happen more or less the same way in the game?
See, in the game, I could be wrong about this, because the whole time I was expecting Marlene to tell Joel.
Yeah.
Because I thought that was what happened. And when she didn't tell him, I was like, wait, am I misremembering, or are they changing it? So it's something I don't remember. I really don't remember. Because I don't think... No, I think it was the same. I think they did have that with the cop. Although that cop was Joel didn't know that cop or anything. That was a little side plot that was new for the series, like him smuggling things for this cop, which I liked. That was a great little addition there.
Yeah, it makes sense that he would be doing things like that in order to survive and sort of thrive comparatively in this world. Was he dealing drugs in the game, or was that an addition too?
He is a smuggler. He's a
Okay, so
smuggler. You don't really know. Yeah, it could be anything. So I think certainly yes. I don't know if you also noticed his watch.
Mhm.
The watch that Sarah gave him that breaks when he falls.
Yeah.
That is something that carries over in the game as well. Trying to think what else. I mean, I think we may have covered most of the episode. And I totally agree. The production design, I mean, I just feel like you wouldn't see this. You're not likely to see this type of production, like quality on Netflix or Amazon Prime. I mean, can they do it? Sure. If, well, like you said, if they announced this for Netflix or Prime, could this very episode have been on those networks? Yeah, why? Sure, but is it likely?
Maybe.
No, it's not likely.
Let's do a side by side comparison. The most expensive television show in history was made by who? Amazon recently. The Lord of the Rings
Right.
show. Huge Lord of the Rings fan, cautiously optimistic about that show, committed to watching it, episode 1 to the final episode. I watched the whole first season through. I mean, that show looks and feels completely fake. And that's in part because of the over reliance on visual effects, but also in the moments where we are in, dressed sets, they look, everything looks like it was built yesterday. Nothing feels lived in, nothing feels old, nothing feels weathered. And so it fails. You constantly feel like, oh, I'm watching a show. Whereas in this show, you never feel that way. And so, do I feel that this show could exist on another network to this, quality level? I gotta say no.
Say no. Wow.
Because you look at Amazon spending way more on another show, and it looks so much worse. So where would the money have been spent if they did The Last of Us instead? Probably in the wrong places.
Yeah.
This show looks great, and I think a big part of why that is because it's on HBO, and HBO is committed to high quality production design. To do another like comparison, you have House of the Dragon and the Lord of the Rings show. Very similar settings, fantasy worlds, and yet the House of the Dragon looks terrific, while Lord of the Rings show does not. And it's because of HBO's commitment to production design quality. So, yeah, it's just I think HBO was the only network that could have done what they've done here.
Yeah.
I don't think it would happen anyway.
And I mean, you look at what was it a few weeks ago? God of War is getting adapted to a show, just like The Last of Us. It's going to be on Amazon Prime, and that level of excitement is nowhere near when The Last of Us was getting confirmed. And these are two shows that are pretty, for me, neck and neck for like best stories I've played in a game. God of War is very different, but I'm not as confident. If it wasn't going on HBO, I'd be like hella confident, really, into that. But with Prime, I don't know. And it is a little bit weird because you would think, I know there's a lot of different moving pieces, but you would think like Sony, and they've been making a statement, like Sony is like, hey, we have this IP. We're trying to like build a catalog. We're trying to bring our story-based IP to gaming, to the big screen. Like they've been making this effort. So I just feel like, why not just do it all on HBO? I mean, I don't know, like why not? God of War would even like the name, like I just feel like that would be such a great fit for HBO, but I don't know, maybe there's just more to it. Maybe they can't maybe HBO didn't want to do it. I don't know how that all works, but
I mean, HBO seems to have a certain amount of commitment to doing shows, movies, whatever, that are grounded in a certain amount of realism. I mean, that's, I
Yeah.
think, true of even House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. I mean, one of the big selling points of that show is it was like, this is fantasy for people who don't normally like fantasy. Like, this is, human stories set in a fantasy world. I think that's probably harder to accomplish with an IP like God of War because it is so fantastical. And I've
Yeah.
never played those games, but I know some things about them. So it doesn't strike me as a property that HBO might want.
Yeah.
But you bringing that up leads me to a broader topic, which is, it strikes me that this adaptation of this game on this network with this amount of fanfare around it is probably going to serve as a sort of seed change in terms of the thinking around video game adaptations. There's so much bankable IP out there for networks, film studios to grab onto and adapt. So you're more into video games than I am. You probably have a whole backlog of games that would make great movies or great shows. Like what do you think the effect of this show's presumed success is going to be on video game adaptations in the future?
So I think it's gonna have, you know, before this show, we've had a lot of video game adaptations, right? Like we have had a lot of them, but none of them really have been good. None of them have really been good at all. Um, I think this breaks the curse. People have always said there's a video game curse, is that they just can't, hey, they're not adaptable. You can't do it. Well, and I mean, Sonic came to the big screen and was good for, people like that. But I think Sonic was a little bit of an exception where it's like, yeah, but that's based on like an animated thing, like not a
Yeah.
story. The movies made their own stories just based off Sonic. It's an animated movie, really. But this is like taking a story, making something. And I think my hope is that there are more projects like this where they are adapting the story and not just throwing it away, because a lot of the stories we've gotten from movies, Assassin's Creed, Uncharted, Resident Evil, those are three properties that could be good on the big screen, but all of them have always done their own thing. They've always just taken the characters and made their own story. So my hope is that they don't do that. Why not? Like, are you going to take the Harry Potter books and make your own stories? No. Or Game of Thrones books? Like, you should be, if you're adapting something, adapt it. Just adapt it. And you can play with it a little bit, of course, because it's a video game. It's a little bit not as like step for step. But not only this year is big because you have one of Sony's biggest IPs with a great show. Nintendo in a few months having their biggest IP with a movie. Yeah, it's a little crazy that in the same year, Sony and Nintendo both having something that, fingers crossed, both look really great. So this could be the year that really just like pushes that forward. And they're also totally different mediums. One's a show, one's a movie, one's animated, one's live action. So I hope it just both can pioneer and push things forward.
You made a great point, which is that the failure of so many of these adaptations is that they don't directly adapt. They try to do their own thing. Even that recent Uncharted movie, it was like, why the fuck are we casting little Tom Holland as this character? I haven't even played those games, but I know of them. I know what they're about. It didn't make any sense to even me, somebody who had only passive familiarity with it. So yeah, I hope that the key lesson that is learned from The Last of Us's success thus far and probably continued success is that don't piss off the fans. Like, they want a direct adaptation. Like you said, you can tweak things, change things to make it work for this different medium, but adapt the story directly. And I think the other thing that I hope people learn is that it doesn't just have to be kid stuff. Like you cite Sonic. Sonic, yeah, you and I like Sonic, and it's fun for people of all ages, but predominantly that's marketed toward, directed at kids.
Yes.
Family. But this show being successful should show studios that there is an adult audience that is hungry for adaptations of games they love. And so
not only that, but people, I'm imagining this show is going to do numbers.
Yeah,
Now,
we don't
you've
know
already
yet.
got a built-in fan base. You've got built-in people talking about this. And if you're going to deliver for the fans, which gaming is a big industry, bigger than books. I mean, people read books too, but
Yeah, at this point.
you don't need to know, like, I mean, you're already, if you're making new IP, it's new IP. Like, people don't know what that is. So, like, you can feel rest assured if you're going to do it right, like something like a BioShock or these other things. Like, I think what happens is, like, once it gets into Hollywood, I mean, Resident Evil is the biggest. I mean, it's one of my favorite franchises, but that's the biggest culprit. I mean, there's been so many movies, TV shows, and it just feels like that bag of money that any studio and director, once they get it, they just run with it and they just make something. And it's like, you could make, I mean, at this point, I don't even know if they could. The name is just tarnished in film and TV, but you could do it. And there's no reason. Uncharted, I played those games. Like, why? There's no reason I shouldn't be seeing that. And wasn't even a thought to see it because I just knew it wasn't what I wanted at all. So,
yeah, the Resident Evil thing that's a trip. I mean, I've seen stuff from those games. I've played them a little, and I'm always like, how do you get from this to whatever the hell these movies are? Like,
it probably shouldn't be adapted. Maybe that's a little part of it. I mean, it could be, but it would be better to be a smaller scale thing and not go for all the action that they do. I don't know. It would be good as like a horror. Like, it could be a good little horror movie for sure.
Yeah,
But
I mean, that would be a more direct adaptation because that's what those games are. Don't try to turn it into something that it's not. You're alienating the fan base that already likes it, and in the name of what? Attracting like weird edgelords. I don't know. That's a whole other conversation. But trying to think if there's anything else I want to say about the first episode. I don't know. Maybe this is just a good chance to give our closing thoughts. But
yeah. I'm so excited for what is coming. I'm excited to discover some new things. I mean, it feels, this length of the show also feels really good. 9 episodes feels perfect. Like,
and they're all probably about an hour.
Feels very good. I'm excited to see the differences that still occur. I'm excited to see, people's your reaction, other peers' reactions to different things that occur. There's something very simple. I'm very, very excited to see, and I hope it's in this episode. I'm glad they didn't put it in the first one, because I think there was a lot of people were thinking like, oh, will it be in the first one because it's such an iconic thing, and I'm glad they waited because they shouldn't appear yet. So I'm hoping maybe we see it in the second episode. That audio clip I sent to you, that is actually what it's, you probably don't know what that is, but
I had no flipping idea what that was. So yeah, everything you're saying right now is very vague. I'm just like,
no guess what that was. That sound I sent you
sounded like it was probably a zombie of some kind, like
okay,
zombie, whatever you want to. What do they call these things? Do fans of the games call them zombies, or do they call them something else?
Infected.
Okay,
fine. Infected. I mean, some of them, they're infected.
So I'll make that my closing thought. I really liked the infected.
Right. We didn't really talk too much about that. Like, but that they just they're fast, right?
They're fast when they need to be. I mean, they what I liked is that they talked about this in that opening sequence with the scientists being interviewed, where he said, imagine, a world full of organisms, people that have been taken over by this fungus, and their sole imperative is just to expand and spread. And so you see that play out with the way that these infected behave. They're not, I guess it is kind of consistent with the way we see zombies portrayed in other stuff. Like, their sole goal is just to bite and spread and feast, whatever. But there's something that worked better about it here. Like I enjoyed there wasn't a lot of emphasis on like making them creepy. Like, it was almost, they were creepy because of what they did, not because they looked creepy or because what they did was, so uniquely creepy. Like I liked the moment where Joel kind of turns a corner, and I think at this point he's holding Sarah, the daughter, and he sees like a few of them like kind of feasting on people on the ground, and one of them just got kind of no musical notes to like do a jump scare or anything. He just kind of goes like gets up, looks at him, he takes off, and the thing is running after him, and they have such a one-track mind. It trips over the something on the ground. It slams into the dishes in the kitchen.
Yes.
They're sort of just like this. It's almost like they're like a single cell organism that only can do one thing, and that is spread. And I kind of liked that idea. And so the way that the infected were portrayed in the show was not ultra different from zombies and other stuff, but different enough to be singular and feel a little bit more consistent with the idea of what caused this in the first place. I liked that. So I look forward to seeing more of the infected and maybe different types, because what we've seen in the trailers, you kind of see infected who are maybe a little further along in the process, it looks like. You even see really big ones, and I'm wondering if that was not a person, if maybe that was an animal. I would assume animals probably get infected too. Are there wolves and bears and shit that get infected?
You may have to see, but
well, I look forward to it.
Yeah, I'll say this: if there are, if they go the animal route, that will be pretty new. That's not really a part of the games, so I can tell you that the animal thing is a little, not really in the games. But the most obvious, I think, comparison, of course, is a show that you and I don't watch. Probably you watched in the beginning, like everyone did, The Walking Dead. Now, very different show, right? I mean, you used to watch that probably, right? In the beginning,
I watched the first 2 episodes and I was out. I never really.
Oh, even in first season, really?
Never was a huge fan. It felt a little bit. I don't know.
Gung ho. Little like, let's go.
Word for it.
Yeah, I watched the first 4 seasons. It's got some good stuff. I think the first season was good, and in that show, the zombies are called walkers. They're walkers. Why do they call them that? Because they walk. They're not really scary at all. I mean, they're scary maybe if you're around a bunch of them, and by getting overwhelmed. And the show did some good things with that. But this is the complete opposite. I mean, you might as well call these runners because they're running at you all the time. So I thought like that this show, I mean, that show was so much about the zombies. And I know before the show came out, we talked about this, and you had asked me, kind of referring to it like a zombie type of game. And I'm like, it's weird. I wouldn't call the game that. And maybe I don't know if you quite feel that way now, but maybe you kind of see like it's not really, it's not like The Walking Dead where it's about shooting up some walkers. Let's go shoot some walkers up. It's very much about the characters. Like it feels, it's like a post-apocalyptic feel more than the zombies. The zombies feel there as the backdrop for sure. But the last thing you made me think of something, because we didn't say this because this was so great. When the neighbor is running towards Joel, Tommy, and Sarah, and Tommy goes, what are we doing, Joel? He's got the gun, and Joel, makes that decision with his wrench and kills her. And in so many, I mean, probably 99 out of 100 shows, movies that have that exact scenario, they're killing the neighbor and then they're getting in the car and they're going, and there's probably not much thought. Like this show, it's like you can just see the writers saying like, okay, like, well, that's the neighbor, right? That was their neighbor. What would have happened? What conversations would have happened? Like, and it just really gets into that. It does not glorify the violence, and it doesn't pretend like, oh, that's just like for us, it'd be easy. Like we could not even think about that, but like they're bringing in this angle of like, that was Mrs. Angler. Like, what the hell? And they don't really even understand what's going on. That was just so great.
Yeah. It speaks to, something you said before about like, you're just kind of watching as Joel has to make like split second decisions. He kind of has to operate in this binary. and it's a hard way to live, but
Yeah.
what's required of them in this world. And so yeah, I agree. I mean, based on what we've seen so far, I don't feel like the focus is the infected or the zombies or whatever you want to call them. This is a human story set in a post-apocalyptic world, and it happens to be the case that it's a post-apocalyptic world because of this virus outbreak. It could have just as easily been, post-nuclear war or whatever, and the story still works because of the characters. So I'm with you.
Yeah, it definitely. And yeah, like you said too, it shows Joel. Yeah, I think that puts it well. Like he has to make those split-second decisions that as you're watching him make them, you're also realizing, well, how many people had their neighbor, Mrs. Adler, run toward them and they couldn't do it. Probably a lot of people aren't going to be able to just, I mean, they see this person running at them crazy. You're not really thinking, oh, I can be bit and turn into one. Like you don't know anything, and you may not have it in you. So it shows that he's rare, and not too many people probably also would be able to do that. But
and that's why he survived.
Yeah. Anything else? I mean, I think pretty good, pretty extensive. It was great. I'm definitely gonna watch it one more time before next week too. Like I think I definitely will.
I might have to, or I might at least have to watch the opening 30-35 minutes again, because
at least that
masterclass.
Yeah, that was really good. But all right, it looks like we had a pretty good amount of viewers in here and whatnot. The stream says 46 views, so people were kind of popping in and out, which is pretty cool, pretty sick. So I don't know if anyone is still in here or whatnot, but thanks for coming in. Maybe we'll do this again next week. We'll see, kind of depending on schedules and whatnot. And until then, talk to you guys later.
So.